that I could turn bad situations around by using a sense of humor, or averting a catastrophe in quotation marks, by humor. So it served me in good stead. And I can be very thankful that this incident did happen on the steps. I only know that she was born in Vitebsk and lived there her entire life until she came to the United States. That my father lived with them in the same home, and they were first cousins, and that they married. And basically, that's all that I know of her life. And that she swam. There was a river near her home, and that she did a great deal of swimming, and she was a very professional swimmer. She was very, very good at it. But basically, that's all that I know of their life in Russia.
Do you know why they came to this country?
Because this was a land of opportunity, and the streets were paved with gold. I was born in Harlem. I was born in Harlem, New York, in 1917. At that time, Harlem does not have the connotations that it does now. It was supposed to be, or was, a middle-class area. And when I was 2 years old, as I said before, my father contacted the flu, which was the epidemic in 1918, and passed away. I did not know him, nor I have any recollection of him whatsoever. And my mother was devastated. And although she had this brother in New York, I guess she wanted to start a new life, and she came to Cleveland with her younger brother was here. And what occurred was she was looking for someone who would be good to me. And so, although she had many opportunities to marry people who were financially set, but had children of their own, and this she would not consider. So when this young, handsome, single individual came along, I don't think that she loved him in the true sense of the word, but she believed that because he didn't have any children, he would be a good father to me. It was the exact opposite. She married an individual who was completely illiterate, came from a family that was completely illiterate, a heavy drinker, and a boor. And she had with him 2 children, which are, of course, half, a daughter and a son. The only thing I know about my father is the little bit that my mother told me, and the relatives that knew him in New York. And from what I understand, he was a very kind, intelligent individual. He was a composer of sorts in songs, and loved to write, and by trade was a tailor and a salesperson. My stepfather was a crude, unthinking individual. She regretted it the rest of her life. And it's so much so that it was all-consuming. She was an intelligent woman, but she couldn't stay on a topic any more than 10 minutes, whatever the topic was, when she would go back to the mistake that she made and how she hated him. She left him a couple of times, or she threw him out of the house a couple of times, but she always had him come back because she couldn't make a living for herself. So just through dire necessity, he would come back into the picture. The one topic was all-consuming, and that was her hatred for her husband. And her only wish was that she could outlive him, to see him dead.
What eventually happened?
She died first. I think that was her biggest and saddest moment. We had a very unhappy life at home. And those are my only memories, my first memories, of either being shunted from one family to the other. My mother went to the hospital, or being at home in a very unhappy family. And basically, that was it. I loved school, and to me, it was like getting away. And I loved reading when I was home, because again, it was an escape. Although I loved it, I loved it for itself. But to me, it was a great escape. And I remember reading at a very, very early age, and I started reading at an early age, fairy tales, because it would bring me Hans Andersen's, and some of the others, because it would take me away from my surroundings and transplant me into a world of fantasy. As I became older, I too lived I'm jumping from place to place because trying to get my thoughts together on it. But I too lived with a great hate, and lived for the day when I could stand up to my stepfather. And I think that day came when I was 15 years old and weighed probably 105, 108 pounds. And my stepfather was going down the stairs to hit my brother, which meant that he would hit him and then come up and beat me. And I can still picture it very clearly. I stood at the steps as he was coming down, and I rolled up my sleeves. Now this was a man who could take iron bars off a fence. You don't see these fences anymore. They're picket fences, and they were made out of wrought iron, and could take the tops and bend them back and forth until they broke off. And I rolled up my sleeves and I said, "If you go downstairs, I'll put you in a hospital." I said, "You can believe me, I will." And little did I know the man was a coward. And I can still picture it. And he backed off. And from that moment, my life changed. And so did my mother's. Because he now that the positions were reversed. And he was afraid that I would do him in. So now when I left home, whenever they would have a fight, my mother would call me, and I would come over, and that would be the end of it. As far as he was concerned, he would back away. When I got control of my life is when I truly started to remember. I can only remember my childhood, and I'm not putting it on tape, of the various instances of inhuman deeds, that I experienced. And so possibly it could be just a block of not wanting to remember every single detail vividly of what your childhood was like. And perhaps it's for the better. Well, one thing I'd like to expound on while we're talking that could be controversial. There's this saying that if you'll forgive, then you'll feel freer and you'll be able to go on with your life. And I've pondered on that quite a bit, because I never could forgive him. And I don't think that it bothers me, but I'd like to repeat this one incident that happened. I love sermons given by the rabbi. And I was at it was a Jewish holiday, and I was in a synagogue, and the rabbi's sermon, strangely enough, was on forgiveness. And of course, these sermons are like half hour, 40 minutes, and his entire sermon was how much better an individual would feel if he forgave and said, you know, this is it. Whatever happened to you because of this individual or individuals should be forgotten. You go ahead with your life now, and you're going to feel. And he said, I can't explain how much better your whole being will be. You'll be a new person. And I sat there and I listened to him, and I said to myself, that really sounds good. It truly does. And I could see myself as I'm saying, and I really think I should forgive him. And I'm feeling lighthearted about it. And I came home and I said to Rachel, I told her about this speech, and then suddenly it was an overwhelming feeling. I thought, I'll never forgive that son of a bitch. And for why should I forgive him? And I haven't to this day. It's a strange thing that I've dreamt about him possibly a dozen times. And each time that I dream about him, he's very, very nice. And he wants to be friendly. And I talk to him, and I awaken, and this perturbs me no end. And I repeated this dream. In fact, I had it once about 3 times, almost in succession. And someone said to me, there's an old Jewish saying that his soul isn't resting because of what he, of the misdeeds that he did, and he's asking for your forgiveness. And so I checked it out, went to JCC, and I got some books there, and I checked it out, and it was in there that, if you get these dreams, that this individual will, is asking for your forgiveness so that his soul rests in peace. And I figured, now I got you, you son of a bitch. I'm not going to forgive you. Let your soul wander around. I just wanted to tell you this story. So I don't really have any forgiveness in my heart for him, and I'm perfectly happy with it, and it has not destroyed my life. My first visual memories were living in we always lived in rented homes, and I guess we lived in so many homes that I don't really have a visual memory of a particular home per se, and it really is just all a blur. If I'm to go way back into my childhood, I remember going from school to school. In other words, I'd be one semester in one school, another semester in another school, because at that time, if the landlord, if you wanted the rooms painted, and the landlord said no, with my family anyhow, then they just moved to another home. So there was a constant change of neighborhoods and of schools, until I was really, until I became 13 years old. We moved into a street off of Union Avenue, and we lived in one home off of Union Avenue, and then we lived into another where I became bar mitzvah, which was 120th and Rexford. And it was there that these events that I told you before occurred with my stepfather, and those are really the more vivid memories because, and actually better memories, because now I was no longer living in fear, and I was also protecting my mother and my brother and sister. And those were good memories because I had found myself, and I lived a better life. I went to junior high school, did quite well there, and went to high school and dreamt I would go to college. And so when I went to John Adams, I took an academic course, which included all the academic courses, Latin, the whole business, and did very, very well until my final year. And then it dawned on me that I could never go to college. There was no way in the world. My stepfather kept saying, "How long are you going to stay in school yet?" Was a, in order for me to go to college, I'd have to have somebody who would give me at least at least money for the bare minimums, you know, that entails going away from home, and that was not in the offing. You're dealing with an individual who couldn't read or write, and saw no need for schooling, and his whole attitude was, "You're eating my food. Go work." The question is, how would I describe Cleveland as I'm growing up? Cleveland was divided into ethnic groups, and you had a Polish neighborhood, which was on Broadway. You had the black neighborhood, which stretched from 55th Street and Woodland and Kinsman down to downtown, and you had the Jewish neighborhood. You had two Jewish neighborhoods, one on the east side, which was which they termed 105th Street, and the other was on Kinsman. And there were more Jewish people on the 105th Street. It was really a Jewish ghetto than there were on my side of it. My side, where I lived, although there were many Jews there and quite a few temples, it was still a mixture primarily of Italians and Jews, and just minorities of Poles, Russians, you know, etc. But those were the two basic peoples that were there, and they had two schools that excelled, and this is what I always felt a certain pride in being Jewish, and that one of my friends once said to me, and I always remembered it. He said, "I'm proud to be a Jew, but I'm sure not glad of it, you know, because of your anti-Semitism, you know, etc." But the two schools that were the finest in Cleveland was a school called Glenville on the east side, and the other school that I attended, you know, both academic schools, was John Adams High School at that time. And of course, not living on the east side, I wasn't really surrounded with Jews per se, which I'm very happy, because it got me to know, you know, the other people, and I grew to love the Italians. One family in particular, and they're all like that. They're very much home people, and they, you know, the opposite side of the mafia. Or maybe it is part of the mafia's thoughts, is they take care of themselves, and they're very clannish, like the Jews are. And whenever my stepfather would chase me, or I couldn't get into my house for a while, I always stayed with this Jewish family, with the Italian family Cirenciones, who fed me and, you know, and watched out for me for a while. So it was I had a nice, it was a nice childhood from 13 on to 17 there. I enjoyed it. I came into my own there, and it was pleasant enough. I became my own person.
But did you have to deal with anti-Semitism?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I did have to deal with anti-Semitism, and for the first time I can recall it very vividly. Next door to me was a family, the Widmers, who were of Swedish descent. To me, that family was like a storybook. There was a mother, a father, a sister, and a brother, and they lived in harmony, and they all sat down to dinner, and they had discussions while they were eating dinner, and the father played ball with the son. It was everything that you could think of that I didn't have, and I thought a family should be. And of course, the son now was my age, and we were very good friends. And I think I was 18 years old. Now, I never had any anti-Semitism up until that point, because it was not in school or anywhere else. And he suddenly found another friend who was an anti-Semite in the true sense of the word. And I still remember it, and it just shook me up. Leonard coming over to me and saying that something about my being a kike, and that why the hell didn't I go back to Palestine? And that's where all the Jews belonged. And that was the end of our friendship for a long, long while. And he was anti-Semitic for many years. We've patched up, you know, our differences years later. But that was my first experience with anti-Semitism. From then on, I you know, had plenty of it.
Like,
I had plenty of it. I think one when I started to work, I think one of the there are two incidents that stand out in my mind of anti-Semitism. One, I started to work in a company as a shipping clerk, and the big as I'm walking up the stairs with something in my arms, I'm carrying it up there, big load, and I heard this guy on the machine, this Polish fellow on the machine, saying, "Hey, Jew boy, when you get done, come on over here. I got something for you." I am a fighter. I had to be, and so I went over to him. I still remember he's about a foot taller than I am. And I said, "You're coming outside with me." And he didn't. He just laughed. He could kill me probably with one punch. But I did earn the respect of the. This was just the beginning of the World War II. You know, it was the months preceding World War II. So there was this thing going on. From that point on, I did have a lot of respect in the plant there. But what devastated me the most was I'm on board ship going to Africa. And again, I'm with an Italian fellow. We sort of have an affinity towards each other. And there was a priest on board ship. And the Italian fellow, mind you, I took Latin besides I knew other things. He introduced me to the priest, Irv Gordon, and the priest turned to the Italian fellow and says, "Mazzo Christu, killer of Christ," you know, with disdain, and that devastated me. And of course, on board the same ship, I got an inkling of what it was that so many people thought about being Jewish. One of the guys there, a Jewish fellow, of course, decided that all the Jews on board ship, mind you, we're going, you know, into a battle zone. All the Jews on board ship were going to have a meeting, and we had a meeting, and the meeting was, and he stood up and said that as Jews, I'm not quoting verbatim, we should be very, very careful of our conduct on board ship and everywhere else, so that we shouldn't be singled out as a Jew. And I have a very quick temper, and this set me off until I went into a tirade about that I didn't have to be careful as a Jew. They may not like me for what I am, but I certainly am not going to change my habits or my thought or my thinking or the way I act because I'm Jewish to please someone else. And that's how I've always felt about it, in that I am what I am, and I'm certainly not going to change. But the beautiful part about that was I was not alone, but there were so many people. I remember my mother saying, and this was something with the Jews, they were always afraid to fight. I would get into fight, and I got into a lot of them. She would say, I would come home bleeding or something, and she'd say, "Leif weg. Parvosa der leif weg." In other words, why didn't you run away? And this thing came up again with the Jews that were on trains going to the concentration camps. Why didn't they protest? One of the reasons was that all the young ones were gone. There were only old people, women, and children that couldn't put up a fight. I don't know, there may be a factor in that. The other factor was, I guess, through the ages, the Jews have never really put up much of a battle. They've always taken the way out of peacemaking, I think, to their detriment. And I think that all changed when Israel came into being, and the 7-Day War made such a great showing. And I think this put a great deal of pride and backbone into the younger generation. And you no longer hear of a Jew, backing off from a fight, or what my mother's favorite expression, leif avec, run away from a fight. So being Jewish, that pleases me. I was surprised when I became my own person, in that I suddenly developed another personality from a very shy, and this took years. It didn't come over suddenly upon me. From a very shy, introverted young person, I became more outgoing, more verbal, and developed the personality that I am now. I suddenly found that I like people, and I like being with people. And I guess that's one, well, it wouldn't be one of the reasons that evolved itself into my being in sales, but I've enjoyed it. Jobs being scarce, I had an uncle who worked down in the market. That meant that he had a horse and wagon, and that he piled it on with crates of fruit, strawberries, etc. And you took this crate, and you went house to house with it. Some people bought, and in this crate were little pints of strawberries or whatever that you sold for that day. And I must have again weighed 110 pounds, and the crate probably weighed 50 or 60. And so it seemed anyhow. And I had to take this crate and go house to house on it. And I would put the crate down on the front porch, and I would ring the bell, and the woman would come out. And it was then and there that I developed my salesmanship through dire necessity. The more I sold, the lighter the crate became. And so I stayed there until they bought. And so I tried with as few homes as possible to sell as much as I could possibly. And I thought I liked it, and I did. But then there was an interruption in my sales because I couldn't get a job. And so I went to work on WPA, that was on roads, and stayed there. Oh, I stayed there for a while, and I had to go down to the WPA office for something or another, and there was a fellow that was opening and closing the doors as the workers were coming, the social workers were coming in, and I got to talk to him. He's probably Italian. And I got to talk with him. He says, hey, he says, you want a better job? I said, yeah. He says, I got a real good job and I'm leaving. He says, this door is yours. He said, all you have to do is open and close it for the social workers that come in. He says, and you'll get a better job. I said, okay. So as the social workers came in, this was the door leading into the building. I opened and closed the doors for them. And sure enough, probably in about a week's time, one of the individuals called me and said, you deserve something better. And they had an opening for me in a Wayfarer's Lodge. It's exactly what the name denotes, a Wayfarer's Lodge. At that time, as you've read, people were going on trains from city to city looking for work. And as they went from city to city, they didn't have any place to stay or any food or any shelter. And this Wayfarer's Lodge, they took the people in for a day or two or three or four or a week or whatever. And they gave you clean clothes and food, and then from there you just went on. And I got a job as a clerk there. And it was rough. It was a rough place to be, because some of these people were mean and ugly. And I started to carry around a little blackjack, a little homemade blackjack that I pounded a couple people on the shoulders with. In the sales, as I said before, how I started in sales was I had figured I had to get rid of the extra weight in the strawberry cases, and from there I took a job in insurance on commission, and that worked out pretty well, and I enjoyed that too. And excuse me, then I met Rachel at that time through my cousin, who decided that Rachel and I should get married. That was it. So she introduced me to Rachel, and I didn't have a job then. And we went together about 3 months, and Norman and Annie, Rachel and I went to Covington, Kentucky, and we eloped. And I still lived with my mother, and she lived with her mother, because we couldn't afford to live anywhere else, and it was supposed to be a secret. Well, what happened was my half-brother, I owned a car, and my half-brother sort of took care of it. And I turned the mileage back so no one would know that we had gone on this long trip to Covington, Kentucky. But he went down to see the mileage, and I missed it by a little bit. And so he said, the mileage is less now than it was here, a couple of days ago. Now, my mother is a blabbermouth. My mother couldn't keep a secret, if her whole life depended on it. But I told him, that I was married, and she knew Rachel, and that my mother never told Rachel or anyone else. I still can't believe it happened, that we were married. And let's see. Then I got a job in an appliance company, and we lived with Rachel's mother prior to my going into the Army for a while. Her brother and her sister-in-law lived there first, and they moved out, and we moved in, and we stayed with them. This is all prior to going to the Army. Then, of course, I went into the Army. And
Wait, what was it about Rachel?
What was it about?
What was it about Rachel? Why did she become your wife?
Rachel was everything that I wanted in a soulmate. She was everything that I wasn't, for one thing, and I admired her for that, and I loved her for it. She wasn't high-strung. She was down to earth. She was very practical. She was very loving, and she kept me on an even keel. And she was very forgiving. But I do have, and I can't control it. I try. I have a quick temper. It stood me in good stead many, many times, but on the other hand, it's been a detriment many, many times. So she's everything that I ever wanted in a person. And aside from being my wife, she's my very best friend and always has been. And it was these qualities that I loved and admired in her, as a total individual. And mind you, with the experiences that I had, in growing up, that I was very, very careful in my selection. And I often say that to her, probably more so in my selection because I was 21, she was 20. I knew better the person that she was than she knew the person that I was. But it's worked out very, very well. 51 and a half years. But basically, it's friendship and communication, and to have someone that's opposite you in the right fields. not opposite you in everything, but in the right field. And I've been very, very fortunate. And I tell her that. And I tell her I love her 100 times a day. From the moment I get up to the moment we go to bed. She's my life.
Okay.
The war. At that time, Rachel was pregnant when the draft began, and I was set to go in, but I didn't want to leave Rachel being pregnant, and I did try my very, very best to stay out until at least, we would have the baby. To the extent that I wrote to President Roosevelt. Now, mind you, when I say President Roosevelt, I knew damn well that President Roosevelt would not get the letter, nor answer me. But I knew someone there would get it, and I would hear from someone. And sure enough, I did. I received a letter from a psychologist in Columbus to come down to see him. I don't remember what I wrote in the letter, but it must have been, it was a letter that expressed my feelings. I wasn't against the war or anything else, but I guess they wanted to talk to somebody that wrote that kind of a letter. I have no other idea. And so I went to the psychologist, Rachel and I went down, we talked to him, and he tried to cover the points that were bothering me, but didn't convince me. And my number came up, and I went in. And
When is this?
this is in, let's see, I went in June of 42. I went in the Army in June of 42, and had my basic training in Camp Robinson. Camp Robinson. And then we went, I got to be friends with the captain of the company, and he let me have a furlough to go home. Very nice captain. And I stayed with Rachel, and she was just about ready to have the baby, and she was just late in delivering it. So I wrote a letter to him again, with Captain, dear Captain, and he gave me an extension. And I stayed until Jackie was born. And then, and then I went to, it was Louisiana. And Rachel came down with the baby to Louisiana. We stayed there for a while, and that's when I was shipped out overseas. And Rachel went home. And that's when we boarded the ship. And I told you the incident on the ship to go to North Africa. And in North Africa, I guess they were looking for somebody to work in the office there. And I guess they went through, I don't know what the hell I did, but they went through what your capabilities were, plus your IQ, et cetera. And I got a job in the office, and also, as a mail clerk. Mind you, I wanted to do my duty. I wanted to go out there and fight and be a hero, it says here. But it was also my duty to listen and obey orders. And they told me to go into the office. I had to go into the office. I'm leaving a lot of parts out. I'm leaving, of course, the bombings, and the so it wasn't all gravy to where I just had a job and that was it. And foolish things like sitting in the trenches in Africa, and I hear whizzing going on, shoo, shoo, and so I got up out of the trench, and was looking where the hell this thing was coming, and somebody pulled me down. So I wasn't all that bright either. So what the hell are you doing up there? Those are shrapnel things, coming through. So that was scary, and I've seen brave men when the bombs started to fall, go all to pieces. And I have to relate this. because they're still a part of it to this day. I had a friend of mine. This was still in Africa when we were going through the bombings with the Luftwaffe. It was just about every night. Very nerve-shattering thing. How this guy got in the Army, I don't know. His name was Ben Schur, if I remember correctly. The guy was practically blind. Just a little weazened guy who was a gambler in Rochester, New York. Made a lot of money, you know, in rackets. And he said, whenever there's an air raid, he said, I want you to come and get me. You know, to take him down to the shelter. I said, okay. So now this is every night. All I can hear, you know, there's no lights. All I can hear is, you know, everyone's quiet. You know, there's no noise except the shells falling, you know, and the bombs. Irv, where are you? Where are you? And I would find him by his voice, you know, and I'd go down. Well, once we narrowly missed, you know, narrowly missed a bombing. I mean, you know, with the shells, and he had, I don't know whether you know what a mezuzah is, but it's a little thing that the Jews wear. He took his off, and he gave it to me. You know, as you know, just a gesture of friendship. I kept that for many years until Jessica was born. I don't know how old she was, but I gave it to Jessica. I guess she still wears it or has it. So that was a real memento. I was just skipping around a little bit. After the war, he came into Cleveland and offered me a job in the rackets. I came home. I got on board the ship, and I suppose everyone says that as the ship comes into the harbor and you see the Statue of Liberty there, and it means everything to you. And got off the boat, took a train. I'm saying this for a reason. Took a train, took a cab, knocked on the door, was home, wore my uniform for 3 days, got back into my civilian clothes, and I was a civilian. And what makes us all so crazy, so upset, not really and laughing about it, is, you know, any of the guys in World War II, is when they had the Desert Storm operation, where these guys hardly saw action. The whole thing took 10 days, and they come back and they had parades going all over and confetti and everybody saying "Welcome Heroes" and the whole thing. And I came home all by myself in a cab. No one even said "Hi, soldier." And fact is, when I wore the uniform for a few days, everyone thought it was strange. You know, he's wearing a uniform, and I was in there for practically 4 years. I didn't know a thing about anything else except my daily existence and how the war was faring, with the one object in mind that all of us had, is how soon will we go home. We were not interested in the Holocaust, didn't know anything about the Holocaust, didn't know anything about politics or what was happening in the States. We only knew Roosevelt was our president. I voted for him, you know, for a third term. And it was a very, very close existence, where you were and your buddies were all, and your family at home were all that really existed for you. The rest was on the outside perimeter, and you knew very little about it. The Holocaust definitely was not in our thinking at all. And you didn't know anything about it. All we got was the Stars and Stripes, and they weren't going to devote any amount of space or any space at all to the Holocaust or the Jews or whatever. It's only when I came back and became interested in government and politics to the nth degree that I found out many, many things. Yes, I value my participation in the war. It was a war that was necessary and should have been fought and won. And that basically that's it. I still don't have any feelings that the United States should not have gone in, you know, to become a a combatant in the war. I feel that it was all done justly. However, now I feel, and it has nothing to do with war, but I still feel, I'll just add this in, that I feel that the world is getting better. That the people, I see you opening up your eyes quizzically, that the world is getting better. And I believe that. And because I believe that, I don't have any respect for the flag per se. And I think the flags of nations are a detriment to a universal peace. And I would like to see the day, and I think eventually it'll come, to where the Olympics won't say that the United States has now won 3 gold medals, but that Joe Slovenia has won 3 gold medals, and that the flag of the Olympics will be the flag, you know, for the Olympics, and that there won't be an individual flag, because a flag in itself and the Star-Spangled Banner are combatant symbols, and that's all your flag is. I don't look at it as my country over someone else's. And I don't believe that that the government, I believe that the United States is still, you know, the best form of government that there is. And, but I don't believe that other governments necessarily have to have the same type of democracy that we do, nor are capable of having it. And I think there probably are better forms of democracy than we have. In other words, to paraphrase someone or another, I think it's not my country right or wrong, but my country right to keep it that way, and if wrong, to set it right. And basically that's my philosophy, and I feel that not in my lifetime, possibly not in yours, but there will come a time when there will be one people instead of nations divided. David is my pride and joy, as is Jackie. Very much interested in genetics, and my daughter Jacqueline. Jacqueline is a very, very beautiful girl, very highly intelligent person, and genetically she's very, very much like me, even to the extent of selling. Jackie never had this one instance, for instance, when I first came out with the pill splitter, I was in Philadelphia. Now Jackie is not a salesperson. You know, she's never been in sales, and we just came out with the pill splitter. I told Jackie about it, and I think in just a very short period of time, Jackie opened up 3-4 accounts just going into pharmacies and selling the pill splitter. So to me, everything is genetic. There was just another example of it. You've never met Jackie, have you? Very beautiful. Whereas David has always been the psychologist. He's like Rachel. They're calm people. As a for instance, David possibly was 12 years old, right around in there, 12, 13. I don't know what he did, but I was very upset with him. And I'd like to add that I've never put a hand on David. I'll take it back. There was once when he was just a little kid and I was painting the bathroom, just a little boy, and I had this bucket of paint sitting there. And I kept saying, David, you're going to spill the paint, you're going to knock the bucket over. And David did, and I reached over and I whacked him. That was the only whack that David ever got in his entire life. And so now I'm raving and ranting, and David's sitting on the couch. I still picture it so clearly, and he's not saying a word. Mind you, he's 12 years old, or right around in there. And I said, David, say something. He said, when you calm down, we can talk. There's a saying that goes, the greatest joys of parents is is to see themselves in their children, and also there's this thing of they want their children to be everything that they weren't, and this has not been our philosophy. Our greatest joy is not to see ourselves in our children at all, and I'm not, I'm not. I've never had any thoughts about there being something that I wasn't or isn't. I'm perfectly content with what they are, and I don't have that feeling of loss, you know, in not having them, not seeing myself in them. I know how you feel in that, and I feel the same way because I didn't have a father per se, and I've often thought of this. What would I be like if I had a father? Would I be the same individual as I am now? And I often wonder, would I have the same thoughts, the same attitudes, the same actions to reactions, or reactions to actions, if I had a father with a different kind of a life, if I were nurtured differently? Would I be the same individual? I don't know. I know basically I would, because I believe in genetics. But there's such a thing as environment that has a great deal to do with your personality and the way you look at things. And would that change? Would that have made a change in me? And basically, I think the possibility exists that you're thinking the same thing. Would you be the same person? You don't know. I don't either. If you had a father that was loving and caring and looked after you and put you to bed and said, say your prayers, and sang you little songs and made poems up about you.
Did you miss that?
Because I did this to my children. I think I would have liked to have that done to me. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The years after the war were very hectic. It bears to keep in mind that I was not qualified for anything. I didn't have a college education. And so it left a lot of fields closed to me. Some of the fields were closed because one field in particular, well, not one field, but one I know possibly I could have got further ahead, was a distributor who wouldn't take me because I was Jewish, and said right off the bat he wouldn't take me. So I only had one thing left for me to do, was to go into sales. I'm very good in what I do, and that's sales, and it stood me in good stead. I don't know if it had been any different. When I came back home from the Army, I wanted to go to school then, and I suddenly decided I had a flair for advertising. So I would go ahead and make up all kinds of little sayings, like, what the hell would it be? I don't know, I think one of them was keep abreast of times for a brassiere. There was a couple of them in Jewish. You remember this Bissell carpet sweeper? And I had one for the Jewish people. I'll tell you in Jewish, now I'll explain in English. So, arbeit nicht schwer, arbeit a bissel. Don't work hard, work a bissel, meaning a little bit. And there were others that, and I thought I'd like to go into that, but I couldn't swing it. So I stayed into sales. I went to work for Atlas Radio, and made up a song about that to the tune of Davy Crockett. And I was in, there was two chains, Watkins and Atlas, and I I can say without exaggeration that I led the entire thing in, in sales. The entire group of salespeople. And they folded up, not because my sales went down. It was a strange thing, how this fellow died. That the fellow who owned it was a very, very bright guy, and I sold a refrigerator. This was a schlock house. They had stuff on the floor you weren't supposed to sell, and so I got a hold of this customer who only wanted the one that I wasn't supposed to sell. I couldn't up them. So I increased the cost of it, because nothing was ever on there. I increased the cost of about $75, and he bought it. That was it. So this fella who owned the place came out of was going home, and he said to me, "From you I can make a living?" So I said, "What's the matter, LB?" He says, he said again, "From you I can make a living?" I said, "I'll tell you what." I said, "How would you like it if I don't sell a refrigerator from now on for you?" I just said it. And I didn't, because he walked out of the door, got a heart attack, and came back in and died. So that was the end of the store. They broke up. And then I got a job as in a distributor selling hardware. And then I went into, which I'm not retired. I mean, I have 2 jobs. I got a job with National Chem Search, which was a Texas outfit, was founded by a father who was selling detergents. And the sons came home from the Army and took this little detergent thing and built it up till now it's international. They're on the stock market, New York Stock Exchange, etc. And those were good years. There was where I could earn good money and do what I liked to do, which was in sales, and be my own boss. By saying being my own boss, what they had was I wasn't stuck to one price. They could, you had, like for instance, I would go into your plant and sell you a chemical for $13. Next place I could sell it, for 11, or whatever. It gave me, which I love. It made me feel that I was in control of my sales. And I stayed with them still, I think it's 28 years. And I'm still with them. Most salesmen think that they have to sell. And if they think they have to sell, they're not good salesmen. The people that they talk to should buy. And there's a world of difference between buying and being sold. I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not. Okay, when I'm selling you, I'm trying to convince you that you should, that this is the product, and I'm lying to you for one thing. I'm not telling you the truth. Many, many instances, and that even though you don't know the product or whatever it is, you still go ahead and talk about it until you finally, you've made a sale. To buy is I convince you on your own by thinking this thing through and not by being pressured that this is the product for you. Now you have a clean sale. You weren't talked into it. What I've told you about this product is true because you're going to buy it again from me. And if I don't know anything about this product, I'm going to tell you that, no, I'm not quite sure of that question that you asked me.
I guess the question is, what makes you a good salesman?
What makes me a good salesman? I treat people the way I would like to be treated if I were buying something. Also, let me say, I have the ability to be friendly, which is very, very important, to make friends with people. And I think my humor has stood me in good stead. And I tell stories. I don't tell jokes. I'm very, very bad in jokes. But I do tell stories that pertain to what has happened to me. Like, for instance, it was like a for instance, and this is a true story. I was going to the post office. This is here about 6-7 months ago. I was going to the post office. One of the entrances was close to the post office, which meant that I had to go around into another driveway and come out and then go back to another entrance to the post office. And so this is a church. And I'm going around the driveway in the church, to come out the other end, because it's got, open on one end, both ends are open. And this car is right over here, and the car backed into me. And the beautiful nun came out, and she said to me in all sincerity, "You weren't there a moment ago." I mean, these are the stories that I tell. And she went even further than that. We had a whole conversation after that. And she said to me, "Are you hurt?" And I said, "I don't think so. I don't think so, sister." And she says, "Come, let us pray." And so I said to her, I just say things, but Rachel gets all upset with me. I said, "Sister, I'm praying right now that you have insurance to cover the damage." And she was very, very nice. We got we became quite friendly. And those are the things I think that make a good salesperson. In that no matter what the event is or what's happening, you can turn into make it easier by being yourself, whoever you are. Talking about the pill splitters, an interesting story. I think somewhere hours back we talked about my brother making it, and the patent it wasn't any too good at all, and it started out from scratch. I didn't really want to get into it. I made a very, very good living with National Chem Search. A darn good living. Supplemented with food stamps, it was even better. No, I'm just kidding. And I think what happened, my brother said to me, "Why don't you take this and see what you can do with it?" And I really wasn't. I think the whole investment was $7,000 or something like that. And I really wasn't interested in. And Rachel's more of a gambler than I am. I think this is very interesting, by the way. I don't gamble at all. And I think one of the reasons I don't gamble is while I was in the Army, Rachel, we didn't have very much money, and I wanted to send Rachel home money. And you can't send Rachel home money on $50 a month. And what I did was, wherever there was a crap game, I would be in the crap game, not shooting crap, but just betting on someone else rolling the dice. And every month, I would send $25, $30 a month home just by betting on the side. Well, this is a big strain on you, So when I came home, since then I don't bet at all on anything hardly. Once in a while she'll tell me buy a ticket, but that was enough for me. That was 3.5 years of trying to make extra money, on gambling. There. Oh, where was I?
The pill splitter.
The pill splitter. So on the $7,000, I didn't really want to gamble it, and Rachel said, "Go ahead, take a chance." So I looked around for a partner, and I had one who wasn't interested in it too much. So I said, "Nate," "take it back." Well, Nate got another guy who we'd worked with in this company, and so I went in there were 3 of us, and basically the overall picture was that I took it from scratch, and built it up to where we now sell it worldwide. And it's made a tidy sum of money for me. I'm not retired in any sense of the word. I'm still working for National Chem Search, still selling chemicals. I wouldn't give that up because why the hell wouldn't I give it up? First place, I earn money on it. I don't have a lot of accounts left, but those accounts that I do have are people I visit with, you know, that I enjoy, and hopefully they enjoy me. And so I'm still with them. And of course, this is a going business. The pill splitter and the pill crusher are a terrifically going business. So I've never wanted to retire per se. I love what I'm doing. I love to get items marketed and people that have them and to enjoy them. And I just like to, I like the field. It's just something that's, I would never want to give up. One passed away, Stanley Fox, that was truly a good friend. And I just lost Rachel's brother, who was a good friend. The good friends that I have are people who after I visit with them, I have to come home and take not a tranquilizer, but some Tums to settle my stomach. And I'm sure it works the same way with them. To us, a good evening is how can we disagree in politics or what have you. And many times with Stanley Fox, especially if we got on the subject and we both agreed, we would drop it and go on to something else that would create a problem for both of us. But we enjoyed each other, and I enjoyed more. Her brother just passed away here a couple of months ago. He was a very, very brilliant man. He was the one that invented the formula for Rust-Oleum, and a very fine mathematician. He could work problems out in his head that would take a computer. And we would go out to dinner possibly once every 2 weeks. And the evenings were, over dinner. We could never agree on anything, but we were very, very good friends. It's something that I find peace in doing. I like to be alone. Aside from liking people, I like to be alone. And it gives me the opportunity to be alone and to contemplate and to think and to see how things grow, and also to dwell on there's a time to seed and a time to plant and a time to harvest. And you see this with your flowers and your vegetables. And it gives you a little more of an insight into life as a whole. And so I like it. And I like being with Rachel, and we work together, in the planning of it. She does the arrangement of it to make it beautiful, but I like to do the actual gardening, and I do plant the vegetables and the tomatoes.
Is the child still in
No, the child still isn't in me. I can look at that without any emotion. No, I've outgrown that. No. No, the only thing that I always come back to the same thing. The only thing that my childhood that that I mull on as an adult is, how different would I be had I had a loving father, or had I had a different father for that matter. And that's basically one of the things that still crop up in my thinking and in my thoughts every so often. How different would I be? Would I be the same individual that you're now talking to? And I wonder, do I regret? Sure, I think every human being regrets some part of his life. I think rather than going on to the regrets of it, I would just like to reiterate once more the parts that I love about my life. My wife and my children and our relationship to each other. And that, I think, can sum up how I feel about life. And so I don't have to say, there but for the grace of God go I. I'm happy with who I am, what I am, and how I've lived it to a great extent.